was meditating, I had an epiphany about King David. I had an epiphany about him that I had not gotten before. As I considered the vastness of David's character, from being a simple shepherd boy to becoming a great musician, to becoming a great warrior, to becoming a great king, to becoming a great adulterer, to becoming a great murderer. David's life, as we will see reflected in some of his prayers, was one that reached the highest heights, but also reached the lowest lows. He was a man who loved God so much that God said, David is a man after my own heart. But he also loved women so much that he was willing to murder an innocent man for his wife. As I thought on the vast expansion of David's psychological and spiritual makeup, I found myself comparing David to a fictional character that came into being back in the 70s. As I thought about King David, this fictional character popped in my head about King David, and I said, you know, King David kind of reminds me of da-da-dum, 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 dum, Shaft. Amen. He reminded me of the character Shaft. John Shaft was a fictional character originally played by Richard Roundtree back in the 70s. And Shaft, as described in the movie's theme song, is this black private eye who's a sex machine to all the chicks. That's what it says about him. He's a sex machine to all the chicks. John Shaft operates his own private detective agency in New York City in the 1970s in the movie. He was a very sharply dressed man for his era. He was quick-witted and sympathetic to those hard cases that he encountered and the people that he had to work for and work with. The film was so successful that it had 3 sequels and several books written about the character. Richard Roundtree was a tall, handsome black man who was even being compared to 2 other fictional white characters of his day, James Bond and Bullitt. And for him to be compared to those white actors back in the 70s was a big deal. So that means that this character Shaft became a classic in the industry, just like James Bond and Bullitt. It was the theme song that crossed my mind and reminded me of King David. The theme song was written by the great Isaac Hayes, and it went something like this. Who is the man who would risk his life for his brother man? Shaft. That cat Shaft is a bad, shut your mouth. But I'm talking about Shaft. We can dig it. It goes on to say he's a complicated man and nobody understands him but he woman. John Shaft. Dun-dun-dun. 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 King David was a lot like John Shaft in that he loved doing good, but at the same time he got a thrill out of being bad. Amen. Like Shaft, David was on the side of the law. He fought for what was good and right, but at the same time, there was a side to him that was weak for sensuality, for sexual thrills. Like John Shaft, David was a complicated man. And I'm not sure if any of his wives, plural, ever truly understood him. Amen.
Amen.
So let's look a bit into the life and the prayers of this John Shaft-like character who became the greatest king of Israel. And now the first thing I want to show you is that David becoming the greatest king of Israel had nothing to do with his own personal greatness. It wasn't that he was so great in and of himself that God had no choice except to make him king. As I said, we will see the vast spectrum of his character from being a great king, but also being a poor father. His character, the expansion of his life was vast. I want to show you his humble beginnings because it gives you and I hope that if God can use somebody like David, then he can use somebody like you and somebody like me. If God can use David to become the king of Israel, then surely there was a place and a plan for any of us in helping to build God's kingdom in the earth. Let's look at our focal text this morning. 2 Samuel chapter 7, and I'm going to read verses 18 through 29. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 18 through 29. See, I know there's some legalistic, real hardcore religious folk that would want to hang me up and skin me alive for comparing King David to John Shaft. How can he compare such a holy man to a fictional character like John Shaft? We're going to see that David was as human as you and I. And it wasn't because of his greatness, his purity, his holiness, his uprightness, that God chose him to do what he chose him to do. I don't even see God saying about David what he said about Job. Amen. He said Job was an upright and perfect man, meaning completely mature. He said Job loved God and shunned evil. He didn't say that about David. Amen. And so I want us to get a practical human insight about this man David, so that as we read his prayers and we look at the reason for him praying those particular prayers, it'll just give us some hope to know that, man, David did that and God still blessed him and still used him. There's hope for me. I'm not as bad as I thought I was. 2 Samuel chapter 7, beginning with verse 18, and it reads, Then King David went in and sat before the Lord, and he said, Who am I, O sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And is this, and as if this were not enough in your sight, O sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant. Is this your usual way of dealing with man, O sovereign Lord? What more can David say to you? For you know your servant, O sovereign Lord. For the sake of your word and according to your will, you have done this great thing and made it known to your servant. How great you are, O sovereign Lord. There is no one like you, and there is no God but you, as we have heard with our own ears.